We all thought things were fine between India and America, but there seems to be a miscommunication. It seems US thinks of India as a vassal state all ready to do its bidding. I think the US has forgotten something. It has forgotten that India does not take well to be subservient to foreign powers. The two countries called each other strategic partners. Prime Minister Modi and President Trump have sung praises of their warm friendship. But it seems like Washington assumed India had quietly accepted a new role, a country that smiles, nods, and follows instructions. Then came a strange moment. The United States announced a temporary waiver that allowed India to buy Russian oil for 30 days. Allowed. As if India ever sought permission to fuel its economy in the past. As if the world's largest democracy ever asked before choosing its suppliers in the past. At the same time, Washington also warned it will never give India the same economic advantages it once gave China, that it will not allow. Today, we here at India Today Global argue that if Washington wants a vassal state, has it come knocking at the wrong door? Has it taken India's silence today as its weakness? Because India has always been defiant when it comes to pressure in the past. Will the government respond to America's threats and warnings? Hello and welcome. You're watching Statecraft with me, Geeta Mohan. The controversy exploded after the US Treasury announced a 30-day waiver on the 6th of March 2026. The waiver allows Indian refiners to buy limited Russian crude that had already loaded before 5th of March and must arrive before the 4th of April. Washington called it a stopgap during the Iran war and disruptions around the Strait of Hormuz. But the language angered many Indians. The United States sounded like a supervisor granting temporary permission. Opposition leaders accused the government of surrendering diplomatic space. Critics asked a blunt question. Why must a country like India wait for approval to buy oil from Russia? For years, the India-US relationship enjoyed a dramatic thaw. Old distrust faded, military exercises increased, trade talks expanded. Leaders praised each other on global stage. Washington spoke of India as a vital partner in Asia. New Delhi welcomed closer ties. The partnership looked strong. But partnership has rules, and sometimes those rules expose hidden assumptions. The Russian oil waiver did exactly that. The US Treasury Department announced a temporary 30-day permission for Indian refiners to buy Russian crude. The order covered shipments loaded before 5th of March. They must arrive in India before the 4th of April. Officials described it as an emergency measure after the Iran war disrupted global oil supply routes. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent framed it as a technical decision. He said the waiver will help oil keep flowing during the crisis. He added another line that caught attention everywhere. India remains an essential partner, he said, and Washington expects New Delhi to increase purchases of American oil afterward. That sentence carried a message. Buy Russian oil now if you must, but remember where your future supply should come from. Many Indians heard something else. They heard the tone of authority. The United States did not say India chose to buy Russian oil. It said India was allowed to buy Russian oil. The difference matters. Countries with equal power do not grant each other permission to trade. The reaction exploded across Indian politics. Congress President Mallikarjun Kharge called the language insulting. He said it treated India like a sanctioned state rather than a responsible global partner. He accused the government of turning the country into a virtual vassal state. Leader of opposition Rahul Gandhi fired another attack. He argued that foreign policy must reflect the collective will of the people. Instead, he claimed India's diplomacy now reflects the weakness of one individual dealing with Washington.
Now the United States will decide who we buy oil from.
Yes.
The United States will come to us and say, you cannot buy oil from so-and-so, and so-and-so, and so-and-so. Russia, Iran, whoever they want. They will decide. Our Prime Minister will not decide. Please Please understand, and they will monitor. They will keep a watch, meaning they will look. And if India buys oil from anyone they do not want, they will punish us.
Why does a country like India need permission from Washington to buy Russian oil? That question traveled across social media like wildfire. People were very angry, and this anger did not appear out of nowhere. Recent months already strained the relationship between New Delhi and Washington. Trump administration imposed pressure over Russian oil imports. At one point, it even linked trade negotiations to India reducing those purchases. American sanctions on Russian companies like Rosneft and Lukoil forced Indian refiners to scale back buying. Then came tariffs. A 25% penalty tariff targeted India over Russian crude imports. Later, the United States softened its stance. Tariffs dropped to 18% under a proposed trade deal. But uncertainty remained. The agreement still lacks clarity. In the middle of that confusion, the waiver arrived, and the tone of the announcement reopened an uncomfortable debate. Is India a partner or a subordinate? Washington insists India remains an essential ally in Asia. The United States values India in strategic forums like the Quad. It views India as a counterweight to China. But Washington also remembers history. Once upon a time, the United States helped another Asian giant grow. That giant was China. For decades, American markets welcomed Chinese exports. American companies shifted factories to Chinese cities. Cheap manufacturing powered China's economic rise. Eventually, that experiment produced a competitor. Today, China challenges American power across trade, technology, and military strength. Washington learned its lesson, and according to Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau, the United States will not repeat the same mistake.
But again, India should understand that we're not going to make the same mistakes with India that we made with China 20 years ago in terms of saying, oh, we're going to let you, be able to develop all these markets, and then the next thing we know, you're beating us in a lot of commercial things. We're going to make sure that whatever we do, it's fair to our people, because ultimately we have to be accountable to our own people, just as the government of India has to be accountable to its people.
He made the position very clear. America will not give India the same economic advantages it once gave China. The message sounded cautious, almost defensive. Washington wants India strong enough to balance China, but not strong enough to rival America. That delicate balance defines the current relationship. And the Russian oil waiver exposed it. Washington sometimes talks like history stopped 100 years ago, like the world still lives in a moment when India looked fragile, exhausted, and newly free after decades of exploitation. In that old picture, India appears as a country that must quietly accept instructions from powerful capitals. But that picture belongs to another era. The India of today does not resemble that weak post-colonial state. It is larger, louder, and far more confident about its own choices. For centuries, foreign empires tried to control the destiny of this land. Colonial rule drained wealth, dictated trade, and reduced India to a supplier of raw material. When independence finally arrived, the scars of that exploitation ran deep. The economy struggled, infrastructure looked fragile, institutions stood young and untested. Many outside observers assumed India would remain dependent on stronger powers for decades. After its independence, India was expected to join either the American bloc or the Soviet, because if you wanted to survive during the Cold War, you had to choose. But something else happened. India rejected the idea that freedom meant replacing one master with another. It started the non-aligned movement, or NAM, where it did not choose to join either of the blocs. It rejected the pressure to fall neatly into someone else's strategic camp. The country did not build its foreign policy around obedience. It built it around autonomy, strategic autonomy. Decisions about trade, energy, security, and diplomacy belonged to New Delhi alone. That principle shaped India's voice on the global stage. One of the clearest examples came under Indira Gandhi, India's third Prime Minister, whose foreign policy carried a blunt message. India will cooperate with great powers, but it will never take orders from them. She often framed the relationship with the United States in stark terms. And I quote her here, "India considers America as a friend, not as a boss. We write our own destiny," she reportedly said during the tense diplomatic exchanges of 1971 when Washington tried to pressure New Delhi over the crisis in East Pakistan, now Bangladesh. That independence in thinking appeared most dramatically during the Bangladesh Liberation War. As millions of refugees poured into India from East Pakistan, the United States under Richard Nixon openly tilted toward Pakistan. Washington even sent the nuclear-armed aircraft carrier USS Enterprise into the Bay of Bengal to signal pressure. Indira Gandhi refused to back down. She told the Indian Parliament that the country would not bow to outside pressure and proceeded with intervention. India's forces defeated Pakistan in just 13 days, leading to the birth of Bangladesh. The episode cemented her reputation as a leader willing to challenge a superpower when she believed India's interests demanded it.
I believe that it is not the task of any one country to say to another what they should do, even if it is a question of helping. It is my duty to put the situation in my country and its neighborhood, to give my assessment of the situation to the leaders of the countries I visit. It is for them then, with their own assessment and what they hear from me, to make up their minds what they think about it and what they should do about it.
Her defiance did not stop there. In 1974, she authorized India's first nuclear test at Pokhran test range in what became known as the Smiling Buddha nuclear test. The move shocked Western governments and triggered sanctions. But Gandhi refused demands to reverse course. She framed the decision as a matter of sovereignty and deterrence, insisting that India must stand on her own feet.
When we first embarked on our nuclear program, most industrialized nations were very critical of us. Their disapproval, even hostility, continues. Cooperation is withheld and solemn agreements are lightly set aside. It is clear that in order to meet our growing requirements of energy for agriculture and industry, we must produce more electricity. We cannot depend only on one source. Excessive reliance on hydroelectric power makes us vulnerable to drought. We need a balanced combination. Our policy is to harness all sources: water, coal, the wind, the sun and the tides, biomass and the atom. However, as I have said, our science, particularly our nuclear science, is dedicated to development, to achieving freedom from want and providing the essentials of an honorable life for our masses. I repeat that we have no intention of embarking on any nuclear weapons program. We want, as someone has said, to make the deserts bloom and not to make the world a desert.
This long instinct explains why the language used in Washington now sparks outrage in India. When the United States Treasury announced a temporary 30-day waiver allowing India to buy Russian oil, the wording triggered a storm. The policy itself addressed an energy disruption caused by the Iran conflict, but the phrasing sounded something else entirely. It sounded like permission, as if a sovereign nation required approval from another capital before it could buy energy. That is why critics inside India reacted so sharply. Why does a country the size of India appear to receive permission to buy oil from Russia? Why does the world's largest democracy look like it must wait for approval from Washington before making an energy decision? Those questions now echo across Indian media, political debates, and social networks. Some analysts argue that the waiver simply reflects sanctions rules. Others say it serves as a short-term solution during the Iran conflict. But critics say the message looks patronizing. It suggests that India must operate inside limits defined elsewhere, defined in Washington. And that is where the deeper problems emerge. Because India's strategic identity never accepted the role of a junior partner. India can cooperate with the US. India can trade with Russia. It can maintain relations across the geopolitical spectrum, but cooperation does not equal subservience. Partnership does not equal obedience. Those two ideas look very different in New Delhi. That is why many Indians feel that Washington misreads the moment. Some policymakers in the United States still seem to view India through an outdated lens. They imagine a country that remains weak, dependent, and grateful for guidance from a superpower. That mindset might have existed in the early decades after independence, but it no longer reflects reality. India's economy ranks among the largest in the world. Its population shapes global markets. Its diplomacy reaches across multiple alliances and institutions. Its energy decisions influence entire supply chains. None of this fits the image of a country waiting for instructions. Yet the language of the waiver revives exactly that impression. It sounds like something written for a sanctioned state, not for a strategic partner. And that is why the debate grows louder. Is Washington simply managing sanctions policy, or does it still see India through the prism of an older world where emerging nations remain permanently dependent on great powers? If the answer lies in that older mindset, then the real problem does not involve oil shipments or trade deals. The real problem lies in perception. But a country's silence can change perception into perceived reality, and that's the bitter truth. Some food for thought for policymakers on the Hill, Raisina Hill. Thank you for watching Statecraft.